Hi, Bob.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Oh, I'm very happy to see you here.
Good to see you all.
Thank you for working so hard to get that to us in time for this meeting.
No problem. My pleasure. Appreciate having you guys around to make life more interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just looking through to see who else is here so I can put it on my minutes. Okay. Oh, and there's Will. Hi, Will. Hey, Tara. Is Jackie on the call?
No, I don't see Jackie.
Did you had her on that email though, right, Betsy?
I did.
All right. Well, why don't we get started? Because I don't want to go too far over. This is a an important and information-packed meeting, so we don't want to be rushing necessarily, but
Oh, here's Jackie. She's just
great.
coming in, I think. Let's make sure. Recording. Jackie?
I am here.
Hi, okay.
Sorry I'm late.
No, you're fine. Okay, well, should we, do you want to bring up the reserve study? You want to start there?
We can do that unless there's anything that we need updating with just old business, anything that we should know going into this. Any board updates? Well, of course, one update is that Jackie is officially our board liaison, but everybody on the committee knew that, but just for all the observers in the room, FYI. But otherwise, anything that we need to know? And I guess I'm really,
Hey, Susan, I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Can everybody else hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Mary, I wonder if you could put like earphones on or something like that. Maybe it's just because it's, like so far away or something. Yeah. Maybe how about put the Zoom call on your phone, Mary, and attach like earphones to it or something like that. How about that? Well, we probably should get moving, but anyway, Jackie, I'm kind of looking to you and just to ask if there's anything that we need to know before we jump right in and then welcome Bob to the meeting.
No, I don't have anything.
Okay, all right, well then, Betsy, Betsy's now in the other room.
Betsy's working with earphones.
Okay, all right.
Susan, did you have questions you wanted to start with, or did you want me to give a brief overview?
I think it would be great if you just gave a little overview, Bob, just your kind of typical introduction to the reserve budget and then summarize your executive summary.
Okay. All right, to do most of it, I won't need to study up on the screen, but if I do need it, if you can let me share it, then I can scroll around to different spots pretty quick.
Okay. Okay, I've turned that over to you, Bob.
All right. So I'm gonna. All right. So that's the funding plan for the current study. But before we talk about that, I'm going to do an overview because everybody always likes to go there first, but I'm going to make you wait. And just go up here to where the components are, just to kind of hold it while I start. So last year, we did a reserve study, which is called an update with site visit. As you probably all recall, in California, it's required that most community associations have a reserve study done with a site visit every 3 years, including a diligent visual inspection of the accessible common areas. So reserve analysts will usually only evaluate, at least in person, those components that are accessible, that are available for analysis. The reserve analysts don't go in attics or crawl into crawl spaces. And the important part to remember is a reserve study is a budget. It's not an engineering or architectural exercise. It's not a home inspection or a pest control inspection. It's purely a budget exercise, but it goes one step further than most budgets, and where the reserve analyst, both by state law and the national standards that we follow through the Community Associations Institute, require the visual observation of the accessible common elements. That means that for elements of the common area that the HOA maintains, we would work with the association, with their experts. That's happened on occasion with different things that have come up. And as the project ages, that'll probably be much more the norm than the exception. So a reserve study has two basic parts. The funding plan I just showed you is, I would call it probably about half of the study in terms of importance. The other part is the expense projections. So that's the page that I have up on there right now. It's the first page of the inventory of your reserve components. And one of the questions we get these days a lot is, how do we determine what is a reserve component? Well, the Davis-Sterling Act is fairly wide open on what's designated as a reserve component. It actually says the major components as identified need to be in the reserve study. So we get more guidance on what is a component from the standards that our people with our designation follow. And that is that for a reserve component for something to rise to the level of reserve component, it should meet a 4-point test. It should be the association's responsibility. It should have a predictable, useful life and a reasonably estimable remaining life. And the fourth trait is it should be above a basic cost, a threshold minimum cost. So said another way, to be a component, it should be association responsibility, usually have a life greater than a year, but less than 30 years, although we break that rule all the time. And in fact, on page 1 here, we do, or page 5. That's kind of the definition of a component. So it's a very wide open discussion. Is maintenance a component? Well, it depends. Custodial maintenance, like changing filters in the HVAC unit or sweeping floors, well, that's custodial maintenance. But once the maintenance rises to the level where it meets the 4-point test, then that maintenance is a component. And in your study, the first set of components is painting. Well, painting is really maintenance of the building wood structure. But because it meets the 4-point test and that it's above a minimum threshold cost. We can identify the useful and remaining life and its association responsibility. That maintenance is a reserve item. And same thing happens with all sorts of different things we have. We have roof coatings for flat roofs. That's maintenance of the roof, but it meets the 4-point test, so it's in the reserve study. So maintenance, and the reason I bring this up is since the collapse of the condominium in Florida last June, where 98 people perished because of lack of maintenance, our whole industry, even for communities like Nepenthe that are planned developments and not high-rise condos, maintenance has been a very big topic. And the problem when we use the word maintenance, when we talk about reserves, is maintenance is a very loose word that has many definitions. Maintenance in the term of, or in the realm of maintaining a physical plant or a structure or a building, there's many categories and subcategories. Before last year, I knew of maybe a half dozen. Now I've found that there's 20 or 30 at least categories of maintenance. So when we talk about maintenance, we really got to be clear. What are we really talking about? The work that's supposed to be done. Maintenance is definitely a reserve component in most community association reserve studies. All right, so I'm going to just scroll through the pages. Some of the hot points in 2022 is you've done painting of some homes, yearly siding work, major siding work. Sorry. Okay, on do not disturb. Roofing, nothing, except for some repairs to extend the roof, the life. You could call that maintenance. Some wood fencing. And this study's sorted so the big items related to units show up first. So the most important is first in your component inventory. And I think that's a good idea that the board came up with a long time ago after we got started with you. Wood fencing, you've got a 3-year plan here that's in progress, ongoing wood repairs. And I'm just going to kind of go down fast so I can get down to that funding plan. That seems to be the majority of the work until we get to grounds where we have some seal coating and asphalt work. And in this year's study, for those of you who worked with us in the past, I redid the paving plan. It's always been a little bit convoluted because you've got so many different zones and sections. A few years ago, you included the private streets in the main study instead of them having their own study. And I don't know, I just got an idea the other night when I was working on this that it was due to be refreshed. Substantively, it hasn't changed. I just got rid of some old notes or shrunk them down so they didn't take as many words. I renamed some of the components to be better represent what they are. Like for sealing, we used to have a 1-coat treatment and a 2-coat treatment. Well, that 1-coat treatment time is gone, come and gone. So those are gone now. So I think if you go through, if you were familiar with it before, I think you'll see it's a lot more logical now and better. So that's one big change from last year to this year, at least in one of your bigger components. Landscaping, you can see here when I talked about usually a reserve item has a life greater than a year and less than 30 years. So usually a yearly component would probably be an operating budget, but we break that rule all the time. That's not a rule that's codified anywhere. It's kind of just a practice that some communities follow. So in this case, and this is kind of a moving target a little bit. We may still have some work to do on the landscape components. before we're done this year, and that's fine. That's normal. This is just a first draft. And I don't, for those of you that don't know, I just got this to the board or to the management over the weekend. So this is brand new to everybody. No one's had time to go through it with a fine tooth comb, I'm sure.
Mhm.
Except for maybe Will. And so now I'm gonna go down just some more grounds things and then more administrative here at the end. The cost of the reserve study is in here. And what's interesting is that 4-point test on what's a reserve component, it doesn't have to be a physical item. You know, components are really things that happen for the components. And one of the things you have to do for your component is have a reserve study. It's in the law. So for example, if you go out to bid for roofing, you know, hiring a construction manager, maybe a designer, a lawyer, someone to do all the work that goes along with that project are bona fide reserve projects. So we really not need to get rid of the illusion that a reserve component has to be something that you can go out and kick with your foot. That is not the case at all. So now that we've looked at your expense forecast, here at the bottom of the page, we're showing, and I know it's probably small to some of you guys, the bottom here is what we're projecting is going to be spent every year for the next 15 years. And actually, we go out 30 years. The second 15 years is on another section here in a minute. So for this year, we've got about 2.7 million being expended. Next year, 2023, the year for which this budget is being prepared, we have approximately 3.3 million. The year after that, 3.4 million. So there's some big numbers here that are planned to be expended from reserves over the next several years. All right, so I'm going to scroll by the second 15 years of data. This is years 2037 through 2051. And we get to the funding plan. I got to shrink this a little bit. So this on page 33, using the bottom right-hand numbers, this is the most important page in the study. Every number in this 200-page document maps to this page. So when we do a funding plan, we have to start with somewhere. So we've chosen to start on December 31st, 2021, where we were able to look at the audited reserve balance that was done by a third party and come up with the beginning balance for 2022 of about 10,449,000. So 10,500,000. So that's a positive number in your fund at the beginning of this year. We then have the next number is, remember I said you're going to spend about 2.7 million this year, or you're projected to. That's the second number, so that's coming out of the fund. The third number is from the budget the board adopted last fall for this year. We have 2.2 million coming back into reserves, which if you divide that by 12 months and 590 homes, we get the amount going into reserves. When you send your money in each month, $318 of that goes to reserves right off the bat. We don't have any special assessments or extra income coming in. We don't, and then for interest, we're using about 100,000 a year. At this says pre-tax. It's actually after tax, and I didn't realize that till I'd already sent it out, and I didn't think it warranted another draft, but I've already changed it for your next draft. It's going to say after tax, but it's still the same. You were at about, we had you at 1.5% interest earned on your earnings. After we take the taxes out, to be after tax, it's about 1.05. It's just, I had the label wrong. So that's a positive number coming back into the fund. And I'm almost done, but before I'm done, I'm going to talk about inflation and interest for a minute, since that's big news these days. So we're projecting the association will end this fiscal year with a little over $10 million. That $10 million then goes up to start next year And then we just have 30 years of inflows and outflows, with the goal being that the reserve analyst, me, had to determine how much does Nepenthe need to put away next year in the reserves over this year. And the answer came out to be 4.1%. And that 4.1% is the amount that's needed for Nepenthe to maintain a buffer of never going below $5 million in the bank. And if you look down here, I've got 4.1% increases every year. And look at here, in 2048, reserves go down to 5 million. If I go to this page, this is the balance every year starting this year. So here you're going to end a little bit over 10 million, like I said. It's going to go down a couple of years, but it's still well above 5 million. But with those 4.1% increases every year, the fund, per the board's goal last year, never drops below 5 million. And that was the number that we were aiming for, was 5 million in the low year over the next 30 years. And last year, it took 3.3% increases to get there. This year, it's taking 4.1% increases. As I close here, percent funded is a number that a lot of folks gravitate to. We don't as much. We think the fiscal goal of that number is way more important than a high percent funded. I know that in the past, there's been some committee members who disagreed with that. And I mean, that's fine. We recommend, we're not the ones that make the decisions. We're just recommending what we think is best. So your percent funded is in this mid-range, 60. And as we get down to that $5 million down here, it goes down into the 20s. But you can see your cash after that year where you only have 5 million, you build right back up to 12 million a couple of years later. So it seems like $5 million is a safe threshold going forward. Your percent funded graph looks like this. So I'm going to go back up to the funding page. Well, for those of you that have never seen a reserve study before, the next page is for every line item that was in those first spreadsheets I showed you. There's a backup page that for every one of those line items, there's an entry for every one of those explaining the history of each component since we started with Nepenthe. So some have a lot of notes, some have a few. If I go down to the paving and landscaping, they're the longest of all of them. Here this one goes back to 2009. So that we do have history on what's happened at Nepenthe in the study, even though it's designed not to look backwards, but to look forward as a budget. So I'm going to go back up to the funding plan with one closing thought, and then I'm happy to take questions or throw rocks at me through Zoom. So we're using at a 2.5% inflation factor and after tax about a 1% interest earnings, 1.5 pre-tax. So one of the pushbacks we get from boards and managers are, well, Bob, watching the news, I know inflation is really like 7 to 11%, depending on what good you're looking at and where you are. How can we get away with 2.5%? And that's a good question. I have an answer. And here it is. The answer is, in any reserve study that you might have done for Nepenthe, whatever inflation rate or interest rate we use has to be good for the whole 30 years. So if I was to put 8% inflation compounded yearly in your reserve study, you all are going to be paying a couple $1,000s per month in the reserves in the not too distant future. And it's probably no more realistic than 2.5%. I mean, we don't think inflation is going to be up near double digits forever. If it is, we probably all got a lot bigger problems. So that's why we're using the 2.5. Some of our clients are pushing us to 3%, and we're fine with that. We could do that here if you wanted to be more conservative. So the other thing we do, we have a multi-step process. So the first thing we did when we took your study from last year to this year, we increased everything 4% across the board without even looking at anything. So for last year to this year, for that one time only, we did use a higher interest rate. Even though now starting in 22 forward, I have to use this global rate for 30 years. So we've already gave a bump to every component. Secondly, when we were going through the expenses for Nepenthe, we increased any where we thought they were low based on today's dollars and what we're seeing coming in, both with your bids. You're doing a lot of work right now, so we're able to get a lot of real-time data on what things actually cost instead of what's on the news. So, and we've been doing this every year, even before inflation was really high. Every year when we update the study, we go through and we'll update each cost based on changes we know for that trade. And then the third thing we do is for clients that want to be conservative, we can bump up our global inflation rate from 2.5 to 3. I don't think we've done higher than 3.5 for any of our 3,000 clients this year. But that is an option available to the board. One of the challenges we're having, when I say we, everybody, is it's not so much that inflation is high, it's that the amount that you're earning on your money is so low. So you've got that disparity between the two, which really hits the reserve study hard. The first 20 years I did reserve studies, we always had inflation and interest be the same or very close to each other. It's only been since around 2008 or 9 that we started seeing a big variance, and they're actually coming back a little bit, and interest has been coming up to where now discount rate out of San Francisco is 2.5%, and that's actually in the civil code that we can't use an interest rate greater than 2% above that. So that would be 4.5%. I don't think we're at any risk of doing that soon with where interest rates really are. So that's kind of a 30-minute primer. Sorry, probably longer than we'd anticipated, but that's the changes since last time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
I just want to say really quickly that just to the group, if you haven't read through these reserve studies, they're really interesting. And what we've done in the past has a lot of really great information about areas where we could improve and look for different materials and save on costs. And it says a lot about, it really helps us to be able to forecast into the future. It's a real treasure. And with that, do you have anybody have any questions? Mary, I see that you have a question.
Yeah, I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. So the first question I have, were there any new categories added this year to the reserve study?
I don't remember. I can look real quick while.
Okay, so I
Betsy.
have several questions. I'll just reel through them and tell me when to stop.
Yeah, if you're going to get into the weeds a bunch, I might have to get back to Betsy in writing, but because I
Okay,
didn't do all the changes myself.
Okay, well, I was just curious if there was anything new added to
Nothing
the reserve.
substantive, unless Betsy can remember something. I don't remember anything when I was going through it.
I don't think we added anything, actually.
Yeah, I don't think so, but
Okay. I'm curious why it looked like the roof life was 30 years and I thought we had 50-year shingles. So I was curious about that.
yeah, there's no roof out there that I've heard of that has a 50-year life. You may have a warranty that says that, but it's prorated. And if you ever collect on a warranty from a roofer, let me know, because it'll be the first one I've seen. A roofing manufacturer, I should say, absent a lawsuit. So I could go up there and look at that. Since I
It
don't
was Well, the discount seems kind of big. If the shingles have a 50-year life and it's only 30, it seems like that would affect the reserve study amount.
I think we have, just to chime in a teeny bit, we've asked that question quite a bit, Mary, in the past. And I think the answer was always kind of to be a little bit more conservative, and with the understanding that, okay, number one, keeping it at 30 keeps it on the budget. And the second thing was that those numbers, the roof life was changed when Bob would come out and do the site visit too. So, you know, if they were wearing really well, then we would kind of extend it. But Bob, you probably have something more like, and
Well, yeah,
other people have
exactly.
more.
Well, I mean, I've heard that before. I mean, I've heard
Okay.
that.
Well, every time we do your study, every 3 years when we come out there, for example, on these that have a life of 18 years left, we may just leave it there. We may leave it there for a couple 3-year cycles. So I won't be able to tell you what your real life will be till they're due to be replaced. But when they were brand new, we used 30 years. And now we just keep moving out that remaining life as needed. But once they get replaced, we want the next ones to also have that same 30-year opportunity. So even though you make it 40 years out of these, we're still going to keep the useful life at 30, because who knows what you're going to replace it with.
Okay. The other question is kind of about the painting and the siding. The paint that's picked has a 25-year life, and the siding that we are replacing it with that we're doing our replacement siding with has a 50-year life. So I'm wondering if in the future we'll change the timing cycle of painting and siding given the quality of components that we are using.
Just to make sure I heard you okay, you said your paint has a 25-year life?
That's what we were told by Kelly Moore.
Okay, well, that's news to me, and I wouldn't believe it. I wouldn't put it in the study. Never heard that.
What do you have in the study?
We have 6 years, and actually
Really?
our recommendation is always 5 years. But with Nepenthe and for the work you're doing, we put it in for 6. Doesn't mean you have to do it. If after 6 years it's still serviceable, you can move it out. So, and initially we did have a little bit longer life based on the direction we received, and we had a mid-cycle touch-up. That's something else we could look at doing again if that was appropriate, but 6 years would be the max I would like to see this, until you got some real history behind you that anything longer than that is going to work.
Well, I think we need to keep an eye on it because it's a very, like I was noticing in the reserve study last year that the cost estimate for phase 1, I think added up to about $1 million, and it's going to cost us $1.6 million. And so, you know, it really matters the lifetime and how often we do this. And when we end up having a difference that's significant, you know, how do we address that? Because that impacts the whole reserve study.
I can't address that because I don't have that data in front of me right now, but there could be many reasons why that cost changed, the scope of work, all sorts of things. If anything, from when we first cast the siding and painting together in this format, the cost have come down to about half of the numbers we originally were given. They were much higher than this. So, and that 1.6 million, if what you're saying is true, it was only the cost of labor and materials and nothing else, there's nothing we could do about that. That's inflation. But I would guess there was a change of scope of work somewhere along the
No,
line.
it was inflation. If you recall, Bob, I did email you when we were getting those bids, because it was a little shocking compared to what we were expecting. And
Well,
you
that
wrote
was
back-
last year, wasn't it?
Yeah, you
No,
wrote
it's
back
this
and-
year.
Yeah, that was this
Okay,
year,
Okay,
right?
I can't remember everything. That's why I said I
I know, you have, how many clients again?
don't know.
Okay, Betsy, Bob, you know, we were on an 8-year, or we were on a 6-year cycle, siding and painting. That was adjusted, I believe, to 8. So as opposed to 6.
Mhm.
So we're not currently on a 6, we're on an 8.
Well, I
Um,
think if that's your recommendation to the board and that's what you want to see in the study, then definitely we could tell Bob to push it out 8 years.
Well, I mean, that was what was decided by, I believe, by the board. So,
Yeah, I recall that too.
it never got to me that I know of. We've had it at 6. We didn't change this on our own back to 6.
no, I
No.
don't think it was ever changed from 6 to 8, even though the board made the decision to set the cycle at 8.
It was.
And I think that's the cycle that we're on too. Yes.
Yes, I believe it is.
So it seems like it makes sense to have it set at 8.
Yeah, it depends. If you just said that. Okay, you know what? All you have to do is tell me what it is you're gonna do, and if I don't
Yeah.
disagree with it vehemently, I'll do it, but when you tell me your siding cost went up by 60%, and now you're trying to lengthen the time that you do your painting, those seem kind of contra to each other.
Well, the painting and the siding are normally done in conjunction with each other.
Right.
And
No, but what I'm saying is,
and we were on a 6-year cycle. The board made a decision to extend it, I believe, to an 8-year cycle, which would mean both the siding and the painting. And then subsequently, the decision was made to cease putting T111 on and put longer lived material. But it may be that nobody ever communicated to you that the board had decided to go to the 8-year cycle.
well, my records indicate the reverse, Will. It shows, I'm looking at 2018 and 2020. Both of those studies had an 8-year cycle.
Yeah.
And looks like, I don't know, I hate to do this while we're on the call, but it looks like last year or 2021, it got moved to 6. So it had been at 8.
Okay.
I
so
don't know who moved that because I was on the board and in my understanding, it was 8, like what Will's saying. So
Yeah,
I have no idea who
2021.
did that.
Okay, we had an evaluation of the paint done and it was recommended to do the work in 2021, which was exactly at the 7-year mark. And so we put it into the 2022 reserve study and that's when it changed. I mean, that was based on an evaluation done by Kelly Moore saying that the paint was already, brushing off. And so I communicated that to Bob and he put it and that was last year was the year we had the site visit. And so Bob's team also confirmed that they were ready to be painted based on their inspections.
Yeah, if you look right here. We had it at 8 in 2021, and we were told to move it from 8 to 6.
But I'm wondering who told you because I was on the board and I never heard that.
Well,
I'd have to go through my notes and see, but that's not something we do on our own. I mean, we've been with you guys for decades.
I know, I'm
No,
just
of
curious
course.
because, I'm kind of tracking with Will and that's what I heard when I was on the board and now suddenly it's 6 and I just think it's weird.
Well, it's probably not suddenly, but you could certainly read through minutes and find it. I mean, but so what I think we should probably move on and resolve this sort of outside the meeting. Just, let's take care of the reserve budget business.
Okay, I have one other question. So we went through what's maintenance and what's not. And so my understanding on operating is an operating cost is something that occurs that one does every year. So if every year you clean up leaves, that's an operating cost. If every year you power wash pavement, that's an operating cost. So I heard what you said about maintenance, but there has to be a line there and I'm not sure what it is.
Well, there is no statute on operating. there's only a statute on reserves. And the statute on reserves does not limit reserve components to a 1-year life. This is a discussion you all maybe need to have with your committee. I can give you some guidance on it, but a 1-year life on a component, I mean, you've got some that are in the tens of thousands of dollars and even maybe more on siding repairs. So basically, I don't have a dog in that fight.
No, I mean, it's a curiosity question. I'm not putting a dog or a fight.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think that if there's some things you do every year, it's an operating cost. Just makes sense to me. That's why I'm
That's
asking the
true.
question.
Yeah, like I said, typically that's true. And like I said, the yearly cost in the reserve study is a rule that we usually don't do, but we break it almost in every study. So you can see here as you go down, especially when you get down to landscaping. And part of it is there's such large costs here. Look at this, trees, 112,000 a year on one item. Add in the other maintenance item, with removals, you're at 150,000 a year. That's a lot of money that if it does swing, reserves can handle it, but operating might not be able to. But again, there's not a black and white line on that answer. It's every client I have, it's different. They all have different philosophies on that. And I'm happy to work with you guys on however philosophy you may want to come up with. You might get a reserve policy that talks about these types of things. Will help provide continuity for boards.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Hmm.
Has to be agreement on it.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like a cost of 150,000 a year would be a pretty big burden on an operating budget. It would mean that homeowners would pay, I mean, I don't know what it would, I mean, somebody can do the math faster than I can, but like $50 to $75 a house just for tree trimming or something, whereas having it in the reserves gives us the opportunity to kind of pay forward or put it on layaway every year. So because we've been funding, for example, this year's tree trimming for the past however many years. So I mean, I think we, in addition to policy kinds of things, we have to think of just real life burden on homeowners. But that's just an opinion, and it would be a great idea to have a little bit further discussion in a meeting.
Yeah, I think this is something to address next month when we're not trying to handle a whole reserve study, but when we have time and Bob's not here.
Yeah.
And oftentimes
Can I just ask one other question? So I was on the board, I treated the reserves as the year as a budget, like that's how much there is to spend. And so I'm curious, so if, for example, so I'm looking at tree maintenance suddenly this year, instead of being 155 is 300,000. How does that affect the reserve budget when items like the siding and everything go over 600,000 and that kind of thing? So when things like that start happening, what happens to the reserve budget?
Well, I'm looking at last year's and now, and except for inflation, they're like they were last year, at least for those two components that equal 155 plus 112. Last year, they were 149 and 108.
No, I didn't specifically state that happened. The one that actually has happened is the siding, painting, and fencing repair, where it's 600,000 more. And so what I'm curious about, if there's a difference like that occurs in the reserve budget, what happens?
Well, the reserve study is a tool to help with your overall budgeting process. It's not intended to tie the board's hands. So when something like that happens, if it's work that you have to do, which in this case you did, obviously, you just do it. The reserve study is just a roadmap, but it's not the final destination. What that is following what it is you have to do, which is prudent management of the reserve assets. So the board has the job, like you did when you're on the board, you have a fiduciary duty to maintain, enhance, and protect the value of the community and its assets. And if the cost doubles from year to year, there's nothing you can do about that. You can't not use reserves because the reserve studies had a different number. What you do is a couple things is, one is you let the reserve analyst know so we can build that in. And secondly, before you make the expenditure, if you're really afraid that that large cost may put your fund at risk, the analyst can run you an option of your study and let you see what the impact of that will be. And if you've got to make other adjustments as needed.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about, is making other adjustments as needed. Because I know that there's a huge issue with homeowners on increase in dues. And so, you know, if we're going to start running over and increasing the costs of reserves and everything else, and it seems like there needs to be a tool to say, okay, if we're going to start doing that, what can we do to readjust so that we don't have large increases in dues? That's a question I have.
Every component should be based on its validity, you know, to the whole. There should be no fudge room where if something costs more, something else can cost less. If that's the case, that thing that should cost less should probably be less already. Everything should have to be justified. Every number in this projections should have to be justified. Now, granted, with landscaping, you could let the landscaping go and defer some stuff. Okay. But generally, every item should stand on its own, every component.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Bob.
Oh, you're welcome.
I just wanted to just make a statement. In one of the examples is the siding, because it has a longer life expectancy, the way that that would impact the reserves in the event that it is a larger outlay in the current year, because of some component has changed. I think actually the irrigation controllers were one of them, if I remember correctly, was we have some that are failing. They need to be replaced. Do we replace it with Wi-Fi enabled versus an individual having to go around to those? But what that would do is when, sorry, Aubrey, when those are replaced, then I think Browning will go through and they'll look at what was in the out years and then is that still needed? So if I look at the irrigation controllers, if we just replace those, that $98,000 that's more near the out year, that may go away, which would then add to what our reserve is over in that out year. So if we are overspending because of something that's hit us within the reserve study, it dips our balance down. And then Browning will go ahead and analyze over to determine whether or not the dues need to be adjusted in order to maintain that level of funding. It's not that they're going to hit you for an assessment. To avoid dues increases, if they do run over, then the answer to that is doing a special assessment to the homeowners or letting the homeowners vote that they don't want the landscaping or where other items can be cut. So I think, you know, coming up with different ideas on ways that we can extend the useful life of items like the difference in siding, I think is impactful to the reserve. Otherwise, it's a matter of what we want to forego in the community in several cases.
Well said.
Yeah. The advantage of reserve expenditures, and I think Bob said this, but I reiterate it, is that it's a long-term planning document. So as Tara just said, if an expense occurs a year ahead of when you expected it to occur, you know, you're over in that year and you can adjust down in the next year and the two will balance each other out. If you simply have expenses that increase over the long term and they were unforeseen because materials suddenly cost 150% of what they were at the time the estimate was established, the answer is you're short and you've got to somehow deal with it. But reserve funding, unlike operating, has that flex. It's a long-term planning versus year-to-year planning. That's one advantage of things being in the reserve.
Yeah. No, agreed. Good point.
Well, thank you so much, Bob, for walking us through this document. And it sounds like we'll have definitely some things to talk about. And
Yeah, let me know whatever you guys need. Happy to make revisions. If I hang up, am I gonna disconnect you guys all? Since I was host for a minute?
I think you have to transfer the host to
Betsy,
somebody else. Actually, it does show Betsy as the host. So
Yeah,
think
I don't
you are
have that.
okay.
I don't have that option, so I must not be host no more.
okay,
Thank you.
oh, you're good. Thanks a lot, Bob.
Thank you all for having us. We appreciate having you as a client. And if I ever sound testy, it's only because you're my favorite client. So like,
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you.
bye.
Okay. I think we are now at, oh, there's one thing that I just want to kind of put this in everyone's mind. Betsy is putting together the draft budget currently, and there's this weird issue. I just want to kind of put it in your mind, see what everybody thinks. Next month we can talk about it when Betsy's got the budget ready for us to look at. And that is the issue with water billing. And as you know, the city is going to begin billing the HOA for water, and supposedly at the same time, those costs will come off of our individual bills. But this is something that we have to budget for. And if everything doesn't magically take place at the end of December and, you know, and the city has got their billing all together so that it's not on people's personal bills and they're billing the community properly, then it would be perfect. But I think there's a concern that things won't be well timed, and then it might not be until March when they start billing us, and possibly, you know, April, they'll take things off of our individual bills. So just budget wise, it's a pain in the neck. And we don't want to double bill, you know, to bill homeowners for services that they're also having to pay the city for. But at the same time, it's, well, you can see the difficulty it is just for budgeting purposes.
Right, because we also don't want to short the operating budget, and we're not collecting for it, and then the big bill comes and we can't pay it.
And Big Bill is looking to be, I think you must have written this somewhere, like somewhere around $42,000, which comes out to about $70 per home
Unit per month.
per unit per month.
Mhm.
So it's a big chunk.
Mhm.
Is it possible, Betsy? I mean, I understand the potential problem, which is, you know, they don't write it off until February or March or whatever. It seems to me that, and I don't know how First Service could handle this, but if that happens and we build it in the budget, we're going to be collecting it. If it turns out there's 2 months where people are double billed, we need to have a mechanism for crediting back to their
Right.
account
Right, And
for
we-
the next, you know, on the next 2 months.
yeah, we can do that. It has happened in the past with different items, and we certainly can process refunds if needed. But obviously, it would be nice not to. It's a big administrative lift. So
It would
what I-
be easy. It would be easier to do credits than refunds, I
True.
would think, you know,
True.
off the following months. But I think it's important that the board sort of take the bull by the horns here and start putting information out 2 or 3 months before the budget kicks in, because people aren't going to pay that much attention, and then they're all going to go nuts when it happens. So we need to sound the alarm and explain it over and over again in real simple terms and not assume people are gonna understand it the first time.
Right, right.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but just on average, we're going up $20 a year. So this would be then essentially $90 to $100 for this upcoming year. That's what I'm
Yeah.
hearing. So,
Yes.
yeah, I would strongly suggest that the communication starts now because that can have a significant impact, especially on the individuals that are on fixed incomes. And then it bothers me when I start hearing about double billing though, too.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to do that. So I have reached out to the city. I'm requesting a meeting with them and, you know, maybe John Baker or somebody from the board, maybe Jackie, that we go and we speak to them directly and we come to some agreement on when that's going to happen so that, you know, one, we can build the budget appropriately, and two, we don't have any kind of overlap situation where people are getting double billed. So that is in the works. Looking forward to hearing back from them.
Yeah, and whatever procedure the board works out, the sooner, you know, that should be included in the explanation that, you know, if this contingency occurs, which we hope we're trying in every way to avoid,
Mhm,
this is the mechanism we're building in to protect you from
mhm.
this happening. And they'll still be calling you by election.
Oh, yes, as soon as they see the first statement.
Do we want to go so far as to make an official recommendation to the board?
I would.
Do I have a motion?
I'll move that we recommend to the board that they draft at the next, well, the next board meeting is what, just next week? Yeah, as soon as possible. How about that? That the board, as soon as possible, draft a policy to address the possibility of the double billing, and that the board immediately start distributing on a monthly basis notification to all homeowners as to what's occurring.
Is it a policy or is it a procedure? For example, February, say it's a double billing. Would it be letting homeowners know what will happen? I think that's more important to a homeowner than a policy, right?
Well, call it either. A procedure is fine. That the board has created a procedure to protect homeowners if this occurs, but then they're also going to have to be told that, you know, you're going to see this big jump in your assessment, but keep in mind this other billing from the city is going to go away at the same time. Because when they see the first number on the assessment, they're going to have a heart attack. And half of them aren't going to think, well, there's this offset from the city. So it's going to take some work to draft it.
So communication campaign as well.
So just to restate, just to make sure I got this right, move to recommend to the board that they draft as soon as possible a procedure to address the possibility of double billing for water and communicate with the homeowners monthly about upcoming water billings.
Communicate at least monthly the upcoming changes, including the increases, the necessary increases in assessment, and the offset from the elimination of the city bill.
And you know, it's probably okay to put it in the newsletter to begin with, but the closer it gets, a special email would probably be very helpful. So it's a focus of homeowners.
Probably an email every 2 weeks.
Could I have a second?
What was that?
Thanks, Tara. Okay. All right. Operations budget.
Okay. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at the July financials.
I did, and I just have a question on the kind of the role of the finance committee in this, since we tend to be a month or two behind in actual expenditures. So I get kind of confused on what the finance committee's doing with these numbers because we're so far behind. So can someone help me with that? Is there a way that we could be more current or?
So Mary, when it typically close occurs at the end of the month, and then it, in my experience, it can take anywhere, the organization that I've been in with the close cycle has been 2 weeks with the financials being put out the third week. At UC Davis, it's typical that I'm getting financials usually about 40 days after the end of the month. It is all a reactive portion, so you are seeing what's occurred in the past. You're looking for errors is kind of what I'm looking at here. I'm looking at trends. I'm looking for variance explanations to determine whether there's any actions on a go-forward basis that may either adversely or positively impact the year end. So I don't know, other than you know, being in Betsy's seat and being able to see the daily transactions. Unfortunately, this is a retrospective review of what has occurred. And then I view my role as just being able to look and see, are we on budget? What are the differences? Are we trending correctly? Were there big hiccups? Were there big savings? Did a bill not come in? Last year, there was a whole thing about the taxes. And so that's kind of how I view, and then also, you know, raise concern if we are trending negatively towards budget to the end of the year.
I just
Well,
want
I guess well,
I
okay.
just want to kind of tag on and say that I think, you know, your concern is really an important one, especially for the reserve expenditures. And I think that the changes that you made to the reserve tracker, Betsy, are really useful. I mean, I just don't even understand how the board could have made any decisions, informed decisions before, you know, putting in those, that pending column. And, you know, and that's, I think that's good. And those are big expenditures too. So, you know, I appreciate your question, and Tara's response still stands. I mean, this is sort of common practice for invoices not to be paid on time. And with the operations budget, Betsy does know, okay, you know, this is low, but we've still got this out, or this is pending. So she can kind of give item by item to address any gaps that we see or weird stuff in sort of common nomenclature, weird stuff.
Well, the weird stuff. So the reserve fund, for example, good point, interesting point. So we're at a budget, for example, on the siding and everything. I'm not sure how with the most recent expenditures with landscaping. So there are invoices that have been paid, you know, I don't know how they all show up, and whether the account balances are based on Browning or what they're based on. So the reserve tracker I find confusing when I look between Browning and it, because the numbers don't seem the same. So I need some help there too.
Well, how about if I put that on the agenda for next month, so we can kind of go through and make sure that everything is understandable, and because we're going to have to look at this reserve budget anyway. So a good place to start would be with the tracker also. Yeah, because it's been on the late side to begin talking about this in my mind. Does that sound good?
Betsy, with regard to the reserve tracker,
Mhm.
you may have answered this in one of your earlier emails, but it seems to me structurally, the pending expense column
Uh-huh.
actually belongs at between year to date and
Yeah, I was a
twenty
little,
twenty-two allocated balance.
Yeah,
It's in
Yeah,
the
I-
wrong place.
yeah, I was a little surprised by where he put it, but at the end of the day, this year-to-date expense is the same as this year-to-date expense. What's not over here is the allocation, but yeah, I can talk to Jim, see if he, even in the
Because-
illustration I sent to him, which was admittedly primitive, I drew a column, right here.
Yeah.
That's where I thought he would put it, and then it showed up over here.
I know. I looked at that and I especially like with landscape, seeing that we overshot that budget line. And, it doesn't look like it should be overshot. And I went, oh yeah, okay, 82,000.
It's
That's right.
confusing at initial examination, and I think it would make a lot more sense if we could drop it from the left
Okay,
location.
I'll
and
talk
move
to
it.
him about that, and I don't have the painting and siding repair contract in here either. So that needs to be dropped in there.
And are all the, all pending contracts with landscaping, do they show up here too? I don't know. I don't see a column where that is.
That's right, my cursor's right on it. Oh,
I had a question related to that too,
Uh-huh.
Betsy. I was just wondering, at what point is pending? When we're when we've already gotten the invoices or when the work is done?
well, the items populating this right here they were approved at the board meeting on 8/3/2022.
Okay. So the
That's,
work may not have been done, but the money has been allocated and that makes it.
Right.
Okay, got
Right,
it.
and so I believe what Jim said is when I get the bill, I should just be able to cut here, paste here. And then it'll go into, at that point, it'll go into the expense, the year to
Oh,
date
nice.
expense.
Yeah,
and
so-
there are going to be instances where the board authorizes or approves an expenditure. I'll just make one up, $2,500 for restoration of an area, and it turns out to be $2,250.
Right,
So that's gonna require a modification, but
right.
So is the board informed? Because this is, even though I was on the board, I feel very uninformed. For example, when a budget, a Browning line is it being exceeded before they commit more money to a certain category, like, is the board informed of that? I don't ever remember ever hearing that.
Well,
Yeah, I usually will put it in the proposed resolution that, if there's more work that is being requested, the proposed resolution will speak to it, or in the background portion of the agenda where I talk about it, I will mention that so that the board has that information.
I mean, I think not only that, but the board member that signs those reserve expense allocation requests also probably does due diligence before they sign them to make
Right.
sure that, it's kind of budgeted and you can go ahead. I mean,
Well, and then this does go to the board every month as well. But to be fair, we were not using the pending, so it would have been easy to forget that previous, work had been authorized and wasn't showing here, which is where I think this modification that Ashley recommended is really good.
So is this accurate to everything paid out on what date?
This is everything that, I updated it on the 25th. And when I did that, I put actions that were approved at the August 3rd board meeting, the very last board meeting. And expenses, I put anything, oh, I can do this by date. Hang on a sec.
Yeah, so it's what's been paid and what is pending a check being cut and resolved.
Right, and then any invoices that I processed in the month of August are also in here. Now, obviously, right now, Carson is doing work and I'm gonna get a bill shortly after the turn of the month, and so there would be work orders. I don't have those work orders in the pending because I don't know for certain what they will cost.
So
But-
all of these numbers though, that I'm seeing right now, they're all reflected in the tracker?
Yes, yeah, you can see how when I put in an amount here, if I tell it what GL it is, it populates over here. This is the programming part of it. And then those tie, so like, when you look at an expense here, it's here and then it takes it over to the tracker. And that's all Jim Donovan's,
But we shouldn't be getting invoices on anything the board hasn't already approved the
Correct,
expenditure on.
correct.
So when they approve the expenditure, if they approve $28,500 for a particular project,
Mhm.
it could run, the eventual invoice might be for a different amount, hopefully not for more, because it's usually not to exceed. It could be for less, but that should have populated that field. So when we say, is it everything expended? It's everything authorized to be expended now that we've added this, expended or authorized to be expended now that we've added this fourth column.
I feel like
So,
Joan Harridan was going through these kinds of things that we used to have these items included in there. Isn't that right, Betsy? I can remember her like saying,
She had her own spreadsheet.
oh, she had her own.
But
and-
yeah, the idea for this, was hers because we do make a lot of expenditures from reserves. It's not like our only component is a, vehicle entry gate. We have a lot of components and a lot of moving parts at all times. So it is a good tool. But, it does require a lot of input and a lot of looking at and thinking about.
I
So-
wonder, this is just a kind of off the cuff idea, but it's just, does concern me with Mary feeling like she didn't have this information when she was on the board. And, it seemed, I just wonder if it might not be useful for the board to develop some kind of document that kind of talks about these processes and, how to go through information and what different things mean, just, for ease of
Yeah,
kind of transfer from board to board, because it seems like a lot of information is lost.
yeah, I agree. I think it would be a smart idea. I mean, we do have a board orientation. It doesn't necessarily go into how to read this or how to read the financials. And I think
This is simplified things immensely, though. I mean, it used to be
Yeah.
a lot more complicated to figure out where we stood, but with the fourth column in this,
Mhm.
it's not rocket science anymore. It's, this is our allocation. This is what we've expended. This is what we've committed. This is what's left. Are we going to stay within our allocate? Now, sometimes you're going to blow out of your allocation, but at least you should know that in advance.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things I find a little confusing, and maybe you can help me with this. This is where I get a little confused is, this beginning balance is taken directly from the reserve fund support schedule. And we know it's what Bob Browning, that this is the beginning balance he has on that projected, chart that he showed us. And so that's fine. But then the very first expenses that I put into here in January are actually bills that were, for work accrued in December. So that's where I tend to get a little confused. Like, is it appropriate to put them in there? I don't know. Some of it, you could say, well, if it was committed in the previous year and you finished out the year with it here and pending, that's just where I get a little confused. And I know you smart people could probably tell me a lot better. Does it belong there? Should I put it in there? Should I not put it in there? Because technically this beginning balance is supposed to be for the work we proposed or, plan to do in 2020, in the new year, but
Yeah, so that would just be like you've accrued it, so you can the reserve for it. It would roll forward. It would be committed against the reserves for the following year. We can discuss that when it gets closer. If there's a need
should-
for my input.
It should be addressed in the beginning. I mean, the problem is we got too many players, too many cooks in the kitchen probably, but it should be addressed in that the beginning balance, if you've got an expenditure that was authorized last year,
yeah,
you didn't pay for it last year. The work was done, but you haven't paid for it.
yeah.
So it was in pending. That probably should roll over should be reflected in the beginning balance, because the beginning balance wouldn't be where it wouldn't have been reduced as it should have been reduced if you'd have paid it in the previous year.
Well, and my confusion is also, so the budget, this says beginning balance, so whatever was in the account, but there's also, Bob has a budget for each of these items. It's not a beginning balance, it's not a reserve funding, it's a budget.
Yeah, and that's the allocations right here.
But the allocation but the allocation for some of these things aren't the same as what I saw in his budgets. That's my point. And so when I was looking at them, they don't exactly match. So that's confusing to me.
Okay, I can kind of speak to that because, for example, I'm trying to think of one where you have a lot, like this one. This is RGL right here, this first column. And this is the places in the reserve study that get paid with this GL. And so it's a lot of different things having to do with the clubhouses and the cabanas, like flooring, furnishes, office equipment. And so they're grouped together. I go through the reserve study, and everywhere where these items are, I add them together and put them here because I know I'm going to be spending them from here. And the same with landscape, like, you saw he had, and that is something I'd like to, talk about as a group, like, would it be better to simplify? Because we have the 3 GLs for landscaping, but obviously in the reserve study, there's, there are quite a lot of different items, tree trimming, tree walks, tree remediations, so those are other questions that, maybe we want to talk about. Do we want to simplify the reserve study? But for Bob, he's looking at each component and he's going to list it as a component. But can you imagine what this tracker would look like if it were as many, the list you saw, the component listing.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk more about the reserve budget and reserve tracker next month. That'll be on our agenda.
Mhm.
And if nobody has any more burning questions, let's adjourn.
I have one question for Betsy.
Mhm.
Okay.
It was my understanding that we were going to ask the second bidder, well, it wasn't a bid, actually, it was a proposal, but the second proposer with regard to the clubhouse solar, to give us, to match those two up so that they could be compared. And I don't know if if they're doing that, or they're not doing that, or they've been told or that, or they're not, they're, you know, what's going on, but I think next time we probably need to, I mean, at some point, we need to be able to look at the two proposals so that we can understand the relative advantages and disadvantages of each one.
Yeah, and I did reach out to, I think the gal's name might have been Mary from Aztec Solar, the second person who provided a proposal. And she said there are a lot of new, like rebates and incentives too. So,
Right.
so I guess the question is for the group or for Susan, would you like to have her here at the next finance committee to kind of present on what she's offering, and she can also look at the Tesla to, I don't know if that's helpful.
I don't know that we're gonna have time next time with the
Yeah, I
other
don't-
things
I
we gotta
know.
deal with.
Because
But-
you have the operations budget to deal with
Yes,
too.
yes.
I'd say the best thing is to get her in advance, you know, and maybe even go back to Tesla and say, look, we need these things to match up well enough that we can tell what each of you is proposing.
Well, and they're different now because of all the new rebates. So
Right.
Correct,
that-
right,
neither of the proposals are accurate.
right,
Right, and Heather
It's almost like we're
actually,
starting over again.
yeah.
yeah. It's Heather Jacks from Aztec Solar, and
Right.
she did offer to meet with the committee separately, if that's something that the committee is interested in doing. She said, just let her know, you know, what would be a good, you know, good date, and she can meet with all of you or whoever's interested in doing that.
But I think we would need to be clear on what we want. I don't think we've
Mhm.
been clear.
Yes.
Well, let's do budgets first.
Yeah.
And maybe meantime, you can just let them know that we're still interested, but we're gonna need updated proposals, and we'll be looking for times to meet with them.
Okay, let me make it. Still interested. Okay.
Okay, all right. Just one last thing, next meeting is the 26th. Good for everybody?
Looking. Yes.
Yes.
Great.
believe so.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, and everybody who's all the homeowners for your participation. And look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thanks, Susan.
Bye.